Kamala Harris closing off the Democratic National Convention with a speech laying out what kind of president she will be if she is elected in November. Well, for his assessment of Kamala Harris's speech and the U.S. election, I'm joined now on the line from London by the U.S. Republican strategist Greg Swenson. Good to see you, Greg. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. So what's being made of her speech? Is there a sense that she covered all the important issues that Americans like you care about?
Well, first of all, I thought the speech was well delivered. 37 minutes, by the way, is fantastic. She kept it brief. She stayed on point. She was very optimistic. So I thought in many ways it was very well done and very well delivered. However, to answer your question about, did she address what voters want to hear? The answer is no. I mean, she was very high on platitudes. She talked about hope and joy and all these subjective things, but there was very little substance. There was nothing about her agenda, or very little about her agenda, and nothing, of course, about her record, which I'm sure she's trying to run from. The 4 years of Biden-Harris administration. So that's not something that I would want to run on either. But it was just pretty clear that this speech, as well as the whole convention, was going to be more platitudes and less detail.
Nevertheless, I mean, she used her speech to reintroduce herself to the American people and to appeal to swing voters, didn't she? I mean, she really tried to draw the contrast between herself and Donald Trump.
Well, I think they've been talking about Trump all week. I mean, Monday night, they mentioned his name 147 times, whereas they only mentioned the economy 27 times, and every other topic was below 27. But I think the point is that she did reintroduce herself. I wouldn't call it introduce. She has been vice president for 4 years, although she was very low key and didn't really get out much. And then she ran for president in 2020. And she dropped out before the first vote was cast, but she was polling around 1%. She was not popular at all. She was polling in 7th place in South Carolina, which is typically favorable for an African-American candidate. So I think in many ways it was a reintroduction, it was repackaging, it was reimaging. And in that sense, she did a really good job. I think the campaign has been very effective, and my hat's off to the Democrats for that, by keeping her away from the press, away from questions, no press conferences, no interviews, and avoiding any discussion of specific policies, with the exception of last Friday, where she floated a few economic policies at a rally, which were not well received at all. And so I think the strategy, and very similar to Biden's strategy in 2020 of staying in the basement, she gets out, which is great. And I think she's good on the stump, but that's really appealing to her base. She's without a doubt generated so much more enthusiasm than there was in the party for Biden. You see that in the rallies, you see it in the polls, obviously, and of course you see it in the fundraising. But I don't think she can continue that up until Election Day. There is a debate coming up, and of course I would assume that the press at some point will start asking her questions that she has to answer.
Well, I mean, you're the strategist, but I would imagine that this kind of speech is not the place that you kind of lay out in detail what your policies are going to be. But clearly she showed herself, as you yourself have admitted, to be a very good, very self-confident speaker, quick on her feet, former prosecutor,
Definitely.
Shown herself in the past to be a good debater, got a bit of an instinct for the jugular as well. I mean, and that raises the question that you brought up, Greg, about what we're likely to see come September the 10th at that first debate between her and Donald Trump. What do you expect?
Yeah, I think it could get, who knows? It could get fiery. I mean, obviously, in the last debate on June 27th, Trump didn't have to do anything. He just had to stand there and let Joe Biden self-destruct. But I think what will be interesting is, so far, all of her speeches and commentary has been unchallenged, because the press either won't challenge her, because most of the media in the U.S. is very much in the tank for Kamala Harris, but also, there's no one to argue with her falsehoods. For example, last night she said that Trump wanted to cut Social Security and Medicare, entitlement reform. That is not true. And he said that many, many times. She said that he would depend on Project 25 from the Heritage Foundation. That is not true. And then, of course, she said he would ban the access to quote unquote reproductive rights, which was their code for abortion. And that is not true. He said that clearly, or he stated that clearly several times, many times. So I think when there's some pushback from Trump that can highlight that the falsehoods that she's stating, and also make it clear that the Democratic policy on abortion, for example, is quite extreme. It's not mainstream. Trump's policy, Trump's agenda on abortion is quite down the middle. It's quite moderate, whereas the Dems, taxpayer funded up until birth, which is kind of sickening, that polls at 13 in America, and it polls at 18 in the Democratic Party. So I'm not sure that these extreme policies that she'll at some point have to admit to are things that will sell with swing voters, with moderate voters.
Well, I mean, let's face it, a lot of political leaders, not just in America but around the world, tend to sort of, if you like, hug the fringes when it comes to the truth, don't they? I mean, there's a very thin line between what they say and what is actually true. I mean, they do these incredible embellishments.
Without a doubt, I think Vice President Harris would not be the first one. Yes, I agree with you, Charles.
Indeed, your candidate is well known for that sort of thing. I mean, in fact, there are many, including people in the Republican Party, who are particularly concerned about what they see as the erratic nature of Donald Trump and his tendency to say the most radical, insulting, and untruthful things. I mean, do you agree with those who say that his biggest vulnerability is his own character?
Yeah, I think that might be an exaggeration. I mean, I think he's got a good character, and we saw that at the convention in July in Milwaukee. But I do think he tends to exaggerate. He uses hyperbole, and I don't think the name calling and the jokes are helpful anymore. Maybe that was working in 2016, but I think it's important that President Trump stays disciplined, like he was prior to Biden being pushed aside. If even people on the left. The progressive media was admitting that the campaign and Trump himself were much more disciplined this time in 24 versus 16 and 20. But that only lasted until Biden was pushed aside. And for some reason, I think he's taken the bait. You saw, you get a lot of criticism and name calling from Kamala, from Tim Walz. And I think that is having an effect. And I think you're seeing that now. And I hope that President Trump can get back to being disciplined, focus on the policies, focus on her record. He has to do a better job of defining the fact that, Harris and Biden caused the inflation perhaps on purpose, but also they clearly caused the open border crisis, the fentanyl crisis with 100,000 people dying a year of fentanyl poisoning. That should be on Kamala Harris, just like it was on Joe Biden. So if he can do that, focus on their record and then focus on the policies, he wins. Right now, he's polling 10 to 15 points higher than Kamala on inflation and the economy. And he's also polling 10 points higher on the open border crisis.
Well, I mean, I think the jury is out on who's polling higher, because all the media, all the polling organizations say that Kamala Harris is leading. I mean, across the United States of America.
Yeah, Charles, you're absolutely right. It's kind of a dead heat. She's up 1.5 points nationally. But more importantly, in the swing states, it is a dead heat. All 7 swing states are now within a point. And so, whereas a month ago, Trump was leading comfortably in the southern swing states and leading, but although closely leading, but still leading in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Now those other 4 swing states are back in play. So this is a very tight race. So what I was pointing out was just that it's interesting that she's basically tied with Trump in the regular polls, in the approval ratings, as well as in the election polls. But on the issues where the question is asked, who do you feel more comfortable with or more confident in on the inflation, the economy, and the border. And in those cases, it's Trump by 10 points. So he should highlight those issues. And by the way, those issues rank as 1 and 2 with American voters. So why not focus on the things voters care about, and let Kamala Harris have the platitudes and hope and joy, but let's talk about what voters care about. He's got to do a better job of that. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, as you pointed out, Greg, they're going to have the chance to put their best feet forward come September the 10th. And it clearly isn't going to be the kind of performance we saw from Joe Biden that eventually led to his withdrawing from the race. So I imagine that the Democrats are feeling more confident about that debate going forward. But
I think they are, and they should be.
Greg, I want to thank you very much indeed, and I do look forward to having a jolly good chat with you again as the campaign progresses. Greg Swenson is a US Republican strategist who will talking to me on the line there from Westminster in the heart of London.